Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Meet the New Brick Cave Authors, a great book tease. My name is Bob Nelson, and I am your host for today's session. This Zoom is presented by Brick Cave Media, an Arizona publisher of science fiction, fantasy, poetry, and curiosities. Please know that attendees are muted. Please feel free to post your questions in the side chart in the chat sidebar, and I will be happy to share them with our panelists. And I'd like to go ahead and introduce our two guests here today. Adam Marsh is a software engineer, U.S. Army veteran, and an author of two science fiction novels, The Changed and Survived. His novels both have received 5 stars from Foreword Clarion as well, and his work has been called nearly impossible to put down by Kirkus. As an engineer and a lover of all things fantastic, his work tends to straddle the line between the real and the unknown. Adam has a degree in computer science engineering and a certificate in novel writing, both from Arizona State University. Welcome, Adam.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Marcus Campbell is a poet and film enthusiast from Phoenix, Arizona. Graduating from Mesa Community College, he received a high distinction in creative writing, along with degrees in journalism and general studies. He is a Vortex Award winner and has placed in several writing contests within the Mesa community. Marcus sweats when he writes, and while growing his magic collection, his work can be found scattered across the web or at Marcus_S_Campbell on social media. Welcome, Marcus.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So, all right, let me just open this up real quick. Let's get this first question out. How are you guys doing in this crazy time that we're in? Marcus?
Yeah, I'm holding up pretty well. Just having to, I guess, crank up the self-care with being inside a little bit more and working from home and doing all those kinds of things. So making sure to take care of myself, take the time to read, take the time to exercise, get outside and get that vitamin D as much as you can. All those kinds of things are becoming more and more important. But it's getting easier with time, which I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. I feel like right as I really nail these routines, everything will open right back up and we'll get right back to how it was supposed to be. But no, I'm holding up pretty well.
Cool. And Adam?
Thankfully, myself and my wife, my family, we've all remained healthy. Nobody's been infected with COVID, and that's something I'm very grateful for. Given that I'm an introvert and my wife is as well, the whole lockdown quarantine portion of this really hasn't been that difficult for us, to be honest. It's a terrible thing, right? But in a way, it's given us a good excuse to stay inside when we'd rather not go out. So that part of it has been all right. I think Marcus hit on something that's pretty important to me. I normally like exercising a lot, and I have not been doing that since the quarantine started. I'm turning into a human potato as we speak. I'm just, dissolving into my chair more and more every day. I do work from home too. So that part of it has been actually kind of nice to not have to commute to the office every day. All that being said, it's definitely a difficult time for a lot of people. I have a lot of friends who've been laid off, and that's been really challenging for them. A lot of, friends have gotten sick. And that's really stressful, and it's been a period of time that's made me grateful for what I have, if nothing else, so ups and downs, man, a lot of ups and downs.
It is. It's an interesting time, and certainly been interesting here in the publishing world. But let's kind of start with your pre-Brick Cave life. So, Adam, you talk a little bit about some of the books that you've already put out and some of the writing that you've done previous to Brick Cave.
Okay. Yeah. So previous to this, I had 2 novels that you mentioned during the bio, The Changed and Survived. Both of them had good critical reviews from trade publications. What I found is that marketing and production were incredibly challenging. And I don't need to tell you that as a publisher, right? There's a lot of hats you have to put on if you want to go at this alone. Not only are you a writer, but you have to be able to go and find a qualified editor and get a good relationship with them. You're in charge of going and finding an illustrator who can work well to deadlines. You're having to learn about typesetting and printing, and it's a lot, and that experience really made me want to join a strong publishing community. And I think that this opportunity really came at an exceptional time for me, because I was just in this phase of my career where I wanted to start that journey of finding a publisher to be a part of. I've been writing stories since I was able to pick up a pen, but taking it seriously, I guess you could say, for a little over a decade now. That's when I wrote my first novel, realized it sucked, and then started taking courses to get better, because there's so much about craft that you don't think about when you're a reader and you're an enthusiast. You just think, hey, this is a story, I want to do this too. And that's a great place to start. But for me personally, I found out it was really just the beginning. So, I took courses. I did the Novel Year program at the Piper Center at ASU. And I just kept writing and writing and writing. And it resulted in half a dozen novels, only 2 of which really saw the light of day. And one who, Brick Cave is going to be getting a look at here pretty soon. So that was my life before coming here. And ups and downs again. It was pretty good, but I'm really excited to start this next chapter with you guys.
Cool. And Marcus?
Well, I spent most of my time pre-Brick Cave at Mesa Community College. So I transitioned from ASU, where I was studying the sciences, to Mesa Community College when I just became dissatisfied with that whole process. And I kind of fell in love with writing through a number of things, mainly through film. I took some film into literature courses, and then through that process, rediscovered my love of literature that I always had as a kid, but it's kind of fallen out of through a lot of other things and a lot of other interests, or things that I at least thought I was interested in. So firstly, I stumbled into the creative writing program, and that's where I completed my certificate there at MCC with Joshua Raskamp as my mentor. It's a great program that I'd recommend to community writers who want to get, improve their writing and meet more community members in the area. And then I also worked at the Mesa Legend, which is the community college newspaper down there. So I got a lot of experience running around the campus and running around the community and writing, 5-6 pieces a week for that community newspaper. So a lot of practice, a lot of words on the page. And so I met Bob actually through an internship that I acquired while I was finishing up down there at MCC. So spent a lot of time in the Mesa community, a lot of open mics, a lot of time down in Phoenix as well. My partner is also a poet, Megan Atencia. So we go to a lot of readings together. We actually met at a reading. So poetry is my life, writing is my life, the word is my life. Been around it my whole life, but recently I started to put a focus into writing, and it's showing a lot of rewards in the last 5 or so years.
Cool. So follow-up question to that. We had kind of teased sort of the title track, if you will, for the upcoming book last night. We kind of threw that out a little bit for people to get their eyes on and see kind of your style. And give us a pitch on that. What's your elevator pitch for that book? Marcus.
Okay. Sorry, I thought you were talking to Adam.
No, you're good. You're good.
My elevator pitch for that is I want to kind of probe identity and kind of what happens when we take a look at ourselves and what happens when other people take a look at us, and the kind of refractory image that creates in a mirror, and how we expose identity, how we deal with it, how it's informed by others. That's the main theme of the work as it runs through it. I guess as an elevator pitch, that would about be as short as it can get before it starts to break out and get way too long.
Okay. So Adam, we haven't really talked a lot about what we're going to unleash on the world to other people yet. So if you had the chance to do a elevator pitch for it, what would you say?
I would say that at its heart, Mariner's Wake is the story of a new seafaring culture born from the fallout of a U.S. Civil War, and they're sort of fighting for their heart and their place in an increasingly hostile world. Like Marcus, I could talk for hours about this. And if I had to condense it into a couple of sentences, that's about the best I could do. It's something that it's a story that makes you think about the future and the effect it's going to have on people, and changing political environments, changing climates. What's possible? What could happen next? What are those people going to look like? And of course, every story comes down to the people involved, and that's where things get really exciting.
Cool. So as we kind of alluded to, and Marcus mentioned, Marcus said you had gotten a sort of an inside sort of peek at Brick Cave before you accepted the offer to publish with Brick Cave. Talk a little bit about how that experience sort of informed your view of publishing.
Well, publishing as an industry and art as an industry, I think, starts to obscure art itself. And Adam mentioned this earlier, where you talk about all the different hats that you have to wear. You have to be marketer, you have to be digital entrepreneur, you have to be entrepreneur, you have to be your own personal accountant, you have to run your own small business where your brand is basically yourself and the thing that you're trying to sell is your craft. And being able to work in a community environment with community readers and community writers and a community publisher allows me to make part of that marketing authentic to the art itself. And it allows me to take control of a little bit more of that rather than having a bunch of people who don't know me or my community or the people I'm trying to communicate with control my craft and my message. That was very important to me. It was also very important to me to be involved in something small and community and local. You know, I buy my meat from the butcher, I get my eggs from a farm, I get my vegetables from a farmer's market. You know, I try very hard to keep everything really close to home. And so I wouldn't ever imagine doing anything else with my writing, ever. You know, my poems were previously published in the community college presses, and I'm very, very proud of that. My journalism was published on a community college level and online as well in some other places. And I'm very, very proud of that as well. And I'm primarily focused on being a community-based author first.
Cool. So Adam, tell the story about how kind of you came to Brick Cave.
Sure. I mean, I actually learned about Brick Cave a good while before we met. My friend Keena is an illustrator, an awesome illustrator. And when he first started working with Brick Cave, he pointed me out, or he pointed me to your company, and he said, hey, you know, these guys are local and they're publishers. I think you should submit to them. You know, I think they'd really like what you're doing. And I checked out your website, and at the time, the submission period was closed. So me being, you know, the person with the fish brain that I have, I promptly forgot about it. And then we met at Keena's wedding. We were sitting at the same table, Bob and Sharon, and we got to talking. Yes, yeah, and we had fun with the food and everything, and just had a great time talking that night. And when you reached out and said you were looking to bring a new author into the stable, I was more than happy to apply and to submit some work. And because I thought it would be a great fit, you know, the idea of being part of a community publisher, like Marcus said, that's pretty appealing to me too. You know, having a good relationship with the publisher. If there's one thing that I've heard from, you know, friends that are also writers who have gotten big publishing contracts, is that they, you know, while they appreciate everything that the Big Five publisher does for them, they often feel like a tiny, tiny cog in a huge machine, and they don't get a lot of say in what the final product is. And they feel like their vision for something isn't really appreciated. It's all about, let me get product onto a shelf. Can you do what we need you to do? And it's not really about the art or the craft anymore. And that's disappointing. You know, I'm looking for a relationship first and foremost, and I'm really happy to be a part of that.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about your influences, your writing style, your influences, what you like to read, that kind of stuff. So, and I'm going to let you off the hook. So you do not have to say any of the other Brick Cave authors in your answers. I will let you off the hook of that. But take a minute and talk about like, who do you think contemporarily are authors that you like, that influence you, that you feel, hey, this person is somebody that we should pay attention to? And I'll let Marcus open up on that.
Okay, well, poetically, since this is a poetry manuscript, I'm really drawn to the work of Natalie Diaz, who is an Arizona poet. A lot of my education in poetry, my early education in poetry, was done using her work. And I don't think I've put it down since. It's always kind of stayed on a bookshelf pretty near to me, a separate one from this. I have a separate one in my bedroom. Also, the Rankins are great. Terrence Hayes is great. I really don't want to leave any names out. Somaz Omar Sharif, also great. Ocean Vuong is great. What Ocean Vuong does on the page is fantastic, and Ocean Vuong's novel is beautiful, more beautiful than anything I will ever write in my life, verse or otherwise. And then I'm really drawn to the work of Natalie Diaz over and over again, though, and especially being a local poet, I see a lot of the flavors and the trends of this community in her work, and that's kind of what I appreciate about that a lot. And also Dinesh Smith. Dinesh Smith's work was very important for me in starting to break out of my box linguistically and thematically, in thinking about, you know, what was possible in terms of poetry, what it could talk about and how it could talk about it. Dinosaurs in the Hood is a great example of that. It's probably his most popular poem. But it uses Jurassic Park and it uses all of these film analogies and all of this different imagery to kind of discuss the hood and the problems that he experienced in his neighborhood and that neighborhood experiences. And that's kind of what I strive to do as well. So all of those poets are great to look forward to. I mean, contemporary authors, fiction-wise, I'm not going to be saying anything particularly novel. I mean, Haruki Murakami is one that I love. I love Chuck Palahniuk, but I mean, you know, these are names that are going to surprise me. But I think Haruki Murakami was a Nobel Prize nominee or a Nobel Prize winner, so pretty sure that's on everyone's radar. But I think that's pretty much it as far as poetry goes. That's what I've cycled through the most often. As far as what I read, I find myself reading a lot of nonfiction. Nonfiction is what I read the most of. So I'm a film enthusiast. I love film. So oftentimes I'll read a chart about a camera movement, and then I'll go skitter off to my computer and go write a poem. You know, it's completely unrelated. Or I have a book on my nightstand right now. It's the history of the American Negro in World War I. You know, guidebooks about about swords or pirate ships. You know, glossaries of pirate ships. You know, that's what I find myself reading the most often. But that might have more to do with my ADHD than anything else. So.
Adam, how about you?
Oh, yeah, influences. You know, it's tough because I read a lot, and I tend not to always remember the details. And unfortunately, I don't always remember author names, but there are some that always stick out. You know, like when I was a kid, I still remember reading books by guys like Glenn Cook or Harry Harrison, the big guys like Stephen King and J.K. Rowling, and Margaret Atwood is a big influence as well. And, you know, it's not an uncommon experience. I've already heard it, where you read something someone else has written and you just think, oh, how did they do that? Right? I am never going to be able to compete with something like this. And I think that that's healthy because it makes you strive to be a better writer in a way. Maybe not healthy for your mental well-being, but it's healthy for your work, right? You have something, you know, you have a gold standard to try and live up to. Lately, I read, or I started reading Atwood's Mad Adam trilogy, which is just amazing. I burned through Jim Hines' Libromancer series, and I read a short story collection recently with a lot of newer authors. F.J. Bergman, who wrote A Prize in Every Box. It was this awesome short story about these kids like in this sort of pseudo 1950s environment who are getting little crazy prizes in their cereal boxes that turn out to actually be real working devices. You know, like they have a remote control that can literally control the world around them. They get a picture of falling snow, that the environment just starts changing and starts doing its own thing, and there's storms in it. It's obviously an influence of some sort of alien technology. I love when people step out of the box like that. There was also a story by Michael Gardner called Foundations. And he has this great concept of people living in these generational houses that are literally built around the bodies of their ancestors who are still somewhat alive inside the house. And it's kind of creepy, but kind of fantastic, and just, you know, weird worlds like that. I love exploring that. I'd say as far as influences go, you know, the authors that have styles that are more straightforward are probably the ones I emulated the most. When I tried to write purple prose, it never worked out really well for me. So I tend to have a much more straightforward style in my writing. So again, that would go back to guys like Cook or Hines, who had great exposition and great prose, but it was right to the point, you know, and I feel like I write more like that. I try and inject a little bit of humor where I can, just because I feel like that keeps things fresh and interesting, and at the right moment, it can diffuse tension. So yeah, I think those are definitely the influences that I think of the most. I'm sure there's a lot more that I can't remember at the moment.
Yeah.
Butcher,
So,
yes.
Let me and stick with Harry Harrison. I'm just gonna say stick with Harry Harrison. He's a good influence.
I loved his books when I was a kid. I did. Stainless Steel Rat, man.
Yep, that's exactly it. The series. That's like that defined my childhood. But let me ask you this, because we, Brick Cave is a podcast, and one of the sort of monthly episodes of the podcast are two of our authors, Sharon Skinner, Bruce Davis. They get together and they talk. Dune came up as a subject in the last podcast, so I'm curious if either of you have read it and what your thoughts are on it, because Sharon and Bruce were very diametrically on opposite sides of Dune.
Sure. So I read the I want to say the original trilogy.
Right.
And there were a ton of books that came after. And if I remember correctly, the series was picked up. I can't remember who, it was it was Herbert's son, right?
Yeah.
Who picked it up. So I haven't read any of those books, so I'm not an expert on the series, but I did read the original trilogy a while ago, and I loved it. I mean, the depth and the detail of the story and the mythology around Muad'Dib and everything, it was just, I thought it was epic, man. I loved it. And some of the details were kind of visceral in a way. I still remember, and it has been years since I read those stories.
Right.
And I still remember the details about the terrible smell inside of their suits, because, you know, they're capturing all the water and perspiration and excrement from the people wearing them, and the homes that they had, their caves smelled terrible because of it. But after a while, who is the main character? Paul Atreides? You know, after a while, he gets used to it and becomes to regard this smell as home, you know? And it's just things like that that I think they're little sparks that made the story memorable and come alive later on. Because, you know, it's not something that you would think about in a sort of nice, pleasant, even forgettable story, you know? And there's all kinds of sparks like that flying throughout. And I don't know, I think from a pop culture standpoint, you remember, of course, the Dune film, right? The original, right? I think it did a disservice to the book in a lot of ways. And I'm not saying it was a bad movie, but I think a lot of people who would have really enjoyed the novels may have been turned off by the presentation of the movie, because there was just differences, right? Like the way the mentats worked, or the particulars around the weirding way and the shields and stuff. I don't know that the movie did a great job trying to explain that, but that's the challenge of a film is, oh man, let me condense, you know, 1,000,000 pages into an hour and a half, right? And it's never going to be easy to do. So anyway, yeah, I'm a fan. I really did enjoy the stories. It's been a while though.
Yeah. Marcus?
Did I mention that I have ADHD? No, I've never read Dune. That's never gonna happen. That's never gonna happen. That's never gonna happen. It's as thick as my forearm. That's not happening. I could read every poetry manuscript I mentioned earlier, and and I think I would be about halfway through Dune. No, but I respect. What I definitely do appreciate about Dune is that I respect the craft of Dune. I respect the craft of anything that can pull someone through that many pages. It's the same thing that would be true of Infinite Jest. It's the same thing that could be said of Tolkien, right? I'm not big on the way Tolkien's written either. But what pulls you through it is the lore. It is what, you know, those sparks that Adam was talking about. Those are what makes the story special. And I don't know if I'm the reader to dig into the texts that are that dense. I'm not, that's just, you know, I tried Infinite Jest.
Great qualifier there, by the way.
Yeah. I'm not the reader for it. Yeah, I'm much more of a Vonnegut guy. You know, like Vonnegut in the back pocket kind of, you know, read it 3 times kind of guy.
So let me ask you guys a little bit, because I know both of you have read some of your Brick Cave peers. Marcus, I know you've read a lot of your Brick Cave peers because you had to do a lot with them. Who did you ping on amongst your Brick Cave peers? And Marcus, you can go first.
Well, definitely the first author that I pinged on was Scott Woods, for sure. Prince and Other Essays, I thought was awesome. And the way that Scott is using his poetry to tell his own story and tell the narratives of his community and the things that are important to him and to others in a unique and interesting way that is engaging to readers. You know, things like Prince and Other Essays don't come about very often. A lot of the poets that I mentioned earlier, one of the things that I find so interesting about them is that they're doing things that are interesting with the form, with shape, with the way that a poem physically looks on a page, or the way that something might be presented or packaged. And so things like that are really what drew me to this space, was that I can see not only Scott, but a lot of other authors doing these things as well. You know, you don't even have to look further than the titles of Bill Campana's works, or, you know, to see that people are doing things that just would not fly in a traditional place, you know. And those are the things that I'm drawn to. You know, the fact that a title that can physically not be put on the spine, those are things, something like Prince.
Don't feed his ego. Don't do that.
Oh, but that's my favorite thing. That's my favorite thing about it all. I love when things break outside the mold, but somehow still conform to it. Like you started off with a 5-pointed star and you broke the mold and you ended up with a 6-pointed star. You still have something that's just as worthwhile. It's just a different shape than you expected it to be. And that's what I love about Scott's work, are those unpredictable shapes and patterns.
Adam?
Yeah. I read the short story collection. I want to say Future Words, and some of the stories that stuck out to me, I think, I'm not going to remember the titles because I'm a jerk, but Sharon had a story in there right in the beginning, and I can admit these things, and I really enjoyed her short story. The setting, it's a struggle from the beginning. You have the protagonist walking through the desert, and you have what seems like a straightforward conflict of someone being hunted by another person. You get a lot of great detail, you're immersed in the story, and then right at the end, your expectations are subverted when you realize that it's not as simple as you thought it was. I don't want to spoil this for anybody, but I enjoyed the craft of it. I mean, anybody can put out a short story. Anybody can write a novel. What it comes down to is the quality of the work, right? And I definitely felt that quality. There was attention not only being paid to the plot, but to the characterization and to the exposition and the dialogue and giving us something fresh and new. There was a great short story. I believe it was by am I pronouncing Giunta? Is that correct? Giunta. And Giunta. Am I getting that right?
All right. You're going to be with us for years. We'll figure it
out. Okay. And if I'm remembering the story correctly, it was and I hope I'm associating him to the correct story, but it was this awesome little sci-fi story about a person who's just trying to eat his lunch outside during work, and he gets approached by a woman who's apparently his daughter from the future. And they start having this conversation about, start having a conversation, and it leads to this idea that essentially in the future, we can go back and visit any moment that we want. And it never has an effect on the future for some reason. And it's like little thought-provoking things like that. I love reading, especially in a short story, because a short story, it's a very difficult form to tell a huge overarching story with a lot of plot twists. And, you have to light on one little idea that you can get somebody to think deeply about if you want them to remember it. And I felt that was done very well. So, I do just respect the talent that every author was bringing into that collection, but I did remember those two the most out of the collection. Just mad respect all the way around, honestly, and being able to become a part of that sort of stable of talent was really exciting.
So let's talk a little bit about your priorities in writing. So when you guys write, when you're each writing your respective works, what's running through your head in terms of, okay, here's my checklist of excellence. Here's the things that I want to make sure that this work does for it to be the best that it can be. Adam?
That's a lot. I think that being, self-critical is important. There's also sort of a dark side to that where if you do it too much, you're never done, right? You never feel like the story's complete. Because you're just going to keep working it and working it and working it. And a scene is never going to feel good enough, or the story is never going to feel good enough. But, from talking to other writers, I feel like that's not a novel experience, pun intended. It's something that every writer goes through, I think, and that at a certain point, you just sort of have to say, okay, the story's done. Okay, it's good enough. And then, every time you read it again in the future, you're probably going to pick out stuff you could have done differently. And I don't know, that maybe that's just par for the course. I try and pay a lot of attention first to mechanics and grammar and just the basics, and make sure that everybody can understand what I'm trying to tell them. And I think that that's a fundamental that when I first started, I didn't do well. I think that I came into this game with a lot of high concepts and a lot of ideas that were pretty cool, but I wasn't executing them well. And that is when craft became incredibly important to me. How are you setting the stage for a scene? Is your description distracting people? Are you being too boring? Is there enough conflict? Is there enough tension? Is there anything to keep people turning pages? And I think for me, that has been something that's sort of a searchlight for me as I write, or especially when I edit, is this page keeping the tension? Is this page keeping interest? And that's one question I always try to ask myself when I'm revising. It's what I'm doing right now, actually, with Mariner's Wake, is, going back through the scenes, going back through the pages, and really asking myself these fundamental questions. Does this keep the tension going? Does this advance the plot? Does this advance the protagonist in their journey? I could talk for hours about this stuff. I really could. And I love being a part of a group where we can talk about these sort of things. It's not something I can bring up with people around the office, But yeah, I think those are essentially the basics. Just asking myself those questions as I go through the writing process.
Cool. Marcus?
Well, I think a lot of the things that Adam touched on there are really important in my poetry as well. I wouldn't describe them quite the same way because, of course, the crafts are slightly different. But in terms of that tension and that conflict and that need to turn a page, I feel like that not all poetry, but I think that my poetry, the way that I write and express myself, it does need to be somewhat essential. And I don't mean essential in the way that water is essential, but it does need to have a point or a purpose in the way that, I need to be talking about something that matters. I don't want to be wasting my time or anybody else's time because that is a perception of poetry a lot of times. And I think whether it's real or not, I'm battling against it in my head. When people read a poem, they expect it to be, a simple thing describing something complicated. And so they are expecting there to be some kind of meaning, some kind of value, some kind of purpose. So that's honestly what stops me from writing more. It stops me from writing as much as I want to. But it's important because it keeps my work relevant. And it's my work is my work because I'm afraid of that, because I look out for that type of thing. I'm also I said earlier, I'm a community focused writer. So I always try to involve my community, my family, everything like that into my work. So all of those things are very, very important. And then, I'm going to kind of steal this one from Adam, but, that tension and conflict and that need to turn the page forward. And in poetry, it can look like a lot of different things. As I'm looking through all my pages next to each other, I'm asking myself, are there moments to breathe here? I have to ask those things because, I think about the things in my poems constantly, but I have to, hand something off to my partner and say, like, do I need a poem with a moment of levity here? Do I need to expand more on this point? Did I actually make my point with this piece, or am I just describing a bunch of nonsense images for, 14 lines? So I think communication is a huge thing in poetry, and making sure that meaning stays, making sure that meaning comes through and that meaning stays on the page, and that 80%, 20% relationship between poet and author is still honored. I can't expect my reader to have to bring so much of their own knowledge and so much of their own interpretation and so much of, having to read on both halves of the page. I can only ask the reader to do so much. And so I'm always really mindful of that and making sure that I'm communicating everything I need to communicate and making sure that I keep that tension and that kind of emotional play in my work, and that I'm also respectful of it as much as I am playing with it.
So let me ask this question, and then I'm going to give you a minute to think it through while I explain why I'm asking this question. What's the funniest thing that you have read that you can recall, and talk about why you found it to be so funny? So comedy's hard to write. It's probably one of the hardest things to really be effective in writing. And so, that's a measure of talent, right? To be able to effectively get somebody to laugh out loud while they're reading a book. So take a minute, think about what in your experience was something that you read that just cracked you up and still cracks you up to this day, and then think about what you think it is that may have done that. And either one of you, whoever's ready first. Since I just threw this on you as a completely unplanned question.
I could take a crack at it.
Okay.
The last time I remember, this is going to sound odd, but the times when I can remember consistently laughing out loud at people's writing, it was usually essayists. And people, why can I not think of his name? David Sedaris, for example. He doesn't write fiction. He writes essays about his experiences and his life. But I remember just on a whim, when I didn't know who he was, I picked up Holidays on Ice, and I was reading it. And he had so many moments in these stories of his that just killed, absolutely killed. Like he had an essay called, what was it called, like Dinah the Christmas Whore, and it was about a hooker that ends up in his house on Christmas Eve when he was a kid, and he had a very straight-laced family. I mean, it was ridiculous. And comedy is very difficult to pull off. And when you think about the times that you laugh the most, it's usually when somebody, a friend, is telling you a story, or when you're watching a stand-up comedian and you have that sort of personal communication between you and them, and that allows the humor to come through. In fiction writing, it's very difficult to get those same moments, because you're not just telling a story it's not a story from me to you. It's a story where I'm narrating it however I'm choosing to narrate it, but there's different points of view and different characters, and we're trying to juggle a lot of balls, right? We have this experience that we're trying to communicate on a sensory level. We have the interpersonal experience we're trying to communicate, and it can be difficult to make something funny ring true. I've tried to write moments in fiction that I thought were pretty funny. I found later that readers didn't find it funny, but other things that I wrote that were just kind of throwaway lines really tickled them, and I have no idea why. Those worked, and the other day, I'll roll with it, but I have no idea why. And if I think about fiction, at times where I actually had good laugh out loud moments, I remember there were a couple of those in the Harry Potter books. You know, usually when JK was writing about like the Weasley twins or something, they'd have a really good moment. You know, especially in the chapters where they were fighting with Dolores Umbridge or something. Those were great. And I think it's rare that a fiction author can pull that comedy card consistently. And it's a good point, because that's something that's worth analyzing too. How did they make it work? I don't know. It's kind of mysterious.
Marcus?
Well, I'm kind of, I guess, pulled towards the darker side of, I guess, what would be considered, you know, funny literature or literary comedy. Aside from the news strips, the Aaron Magruder news strips, the Boondocks, they were adapted into a pretty crude and rude cartoon, but they started with a set of news strips, and those are always hilarious, but those are mainly comic strips. But the dialogues in them between these two brothers back and forth are hilarious. There are a couple of plays that I find deeply funny, again, in a dark existential way. No Exit is one of those plays. If anyone's read it, it's three people trapped together in a room that they come to find out is either hell or purgatory. The tag, of course, that everyone remembers from it is "Hell is other people." You know, at one point they're trying to take the bust off the mantelpiece and bash the other one over the head with it, but it won't come off the mantelpiece. You know, and a love triangle develops, and they can't ever love each other, and they're stuck in that forever. Or you know, something like "This Is Water" by David Foster Wallace, or his lobster essays as well. When we were talking, Adam touched on essays earlier. I tend to lean toward that existential dread kind of comedy. And I'm sure that says more about me than it does anything else. You know, comedy is deeply subjective. So I don't know what it says about me that, you know, the Slaughterhouse-Five, when the gentleman is crying in the armchair, crying in the vibrating armchair. I don't know what it says about me that image makes me laugh, but it does. And I think the reader intended for it to be funny, or the writer rather, Kafka. It was said of Kafka that he used to laugh so loud when he was writing his stories that you could hear him through the walls, which I don't think, you know, I don't necessarily laugh that loud when I read Kafka, but I do laugh that loud when I read Vonnegut or some of these other things. You know, when I read David Foster Wallace, you know, when I hear "This Is Water," the base jokes in that essay and that speech, I do laugh that loud. That is funny to me. When I think about, you know, someone picturing themselves as the lobster and kind of that woe and that kind of dread that is so deep, it becomes almost satirical. Those parts of life that are so hard to look at because they're so grotesque that they become almost funny. Those are the things that I find amusing. And I think that probably says more about me than anything else, but.
So, you know, obviously you guys are both working on your individual manuscripts right now. Based on the timelines that we have for them, they're looking to come out at about the same time. We're closing in on holiday season, so I'm curious, what's your suggestion to a potential reader as to why they should make this a holiday gift for their reader in their life? So if each of you had the chance to kind of go one-on-one with a reader and say, hey, you know what, you so-and-so, do you have somebody in your life that loves this kind of book? This is why they need this book. So throw a sales pitch out there. And I'll start with Marcus.
All right. So my rough sales pitch for this is, of course, that value proposition, right? I spent a lot of time thinking about, making these poems at least worthwhile to someone somewhere. So if you're looking for somebody who is a poet, who does love the word and love the page and just love to see interesting things, or somebody who's politically conscious or socially conscious, that's great. People who are just general readers, I have been putting a lot of time into the design of the book itself to try to make that interesting. So I am looking at making it kind of 2 books in one to kind of double that value proposition for everybody. So they would get collections of short stories dealing with, a lot of different things surrounding my family, my foster brothers, life on the spectrum for some of them, cancer in my family, identity, and the very similar themes that you'll find in the poetry on the other side, filling that with drawings and, hand drawings and getting all of those in. So hoping to keep that value proposition high for the price. So hopefully any reader you give it to will be able to find something to enjoy in it. A lot of different styles, but all with the same aesthetic through line and all with those same themes and those same core values. So please pick it up. There should be a lot in there for everyone.
And Adam?
Yeah, I think, what's going to differentiate Mariner's Wake from other sci-fi stories, especially future sci-fi, is that a lot of what you read these days, it comes with a dose of pessimism and darkness. And not to say that those stories aren't great, but, especially these days where I think we're all sort of saturated with anxiety and dread as it is, maybe you want something a little bit different. So of course, in this story, there's conflict, there's struggle, there's action, there's mystery and suspense. But I'd like to think that it also comes with some rays of hope. It's about people that are sort of going back to what's important to them, despite the environment around them, despite political conflicts, despite struggle. They're a group of people who have decided to get back to taking care of each other and taking care of their home, and they're having to fight to protect that. So, even though there's struggle, there's hope that comes along with it too. So if you feel like everything that comes at you from the news and from Twitter and from Facebook, has got you ready to jump out of a balcony, maybe you could read this and get a little dose of optimism along with your struggle. And because I'm definitely not trying to add to that weight that people are carrying with them right now. So it's sci-fi, but maybe a little bit different from what else is coming out.
So on that note, let me ask you guys, once we do have the ability to, congregate again and we have events, and I know, Adam, you had said you're pretty much an introvert, but what's the first event that you would be excited about attending?
Wow. There's a lot of events I think I would be happy to do. I definitely am an introvert. I'm not incredibly shy. Well, actually, that's not true. I am pretty shy. But in certain situations, I can get over it long enough to interact with other people, especially if I'm excited about what's going on. I love books and I love publishing. So, you could definitely count on my support there. I would be excited about, being a part of something that's, pictured right behind you. Going to a Phoenix Fan Fusion, going to the Tucson Festival of Books, going anywhere where there's like-minded community, where there's people who love reading and people who like stories and the fantastic. Those are my kind of people. And I'm absolutely excited about any of those events and getting to interact with those people. Even if not a single one of them wanted to buy a book of mine, I would have fun just being there talking to people. I know that's a terrible thing to say from a marketing perspective, but it's true. It's fun just to be there and have an excuse to interact with people that like the same stuff,
Marcus?
Oh, I'm going right to the friendly local game store. I'm going to play some Magic the Gathering. I'm going to Friday Night Magic, good old Friday Night Magic, in person, not with some weird arena code, in person, the way it's supposed to be, sitting within 6 feet within spitting distance of another human being, with a soda and a bunch of janky cards that I pulled from some crappy booster packs. It's my favorite thing to do. All seriousness, I play Magic 2 to 3 times a week since I found it as a hobby a few years ago. I absolutely adore Magic. I love it. I love that I can go to an LGS, a local game store, and I can sit across from somebody who I have absolutely nothing in common with and find out that I have so much in common with them. You know, like not even this card game, not even the way that we may treat each other, but, you know, in shared interests, shared values, shared expression, you know, finding out that we love the same card in the game leads to a conversation about loving the same content elsewhere, leads to finding out that we have the same views and opinions and expression. You know, you can find these types of things everywhere. But I love the community aspect of the friendly local game store. And I love everything about it, and I'm having a really hard time with it being cut out. You know, that's where I would spend 6-7 hours a week, you know, of my evening time. So 2 to 3 times a week, I'd be down there for a few hours playing Magic with folks, and it kind of sucks not being able to do that. And everything about playing it online is just so much more hostile, as anybody who plays video games online can imagine. You know, transitioning from a game that's available in person, where there's a certain amount of, you know, respect and fair play, and then you go online and everyone's playing the dirtiest version of every deck, and you know, it's you know, GG's 2 turns into the game because they know they have the perfect hand and there's nothing you can do about it. And, you know, it's a lot of toxicity that you just wouldn't see in person. So I need the LGS back in my life stat.
I'm getting that.
Yeah. A lot of toxicity, Bob. A lot of unnecessary aggression.
I've seen that. I've definitely seen the passion there. I'm ready to get you back into the LGS.
Yeah, I don't need any more counter spells in my life, Bob. No one plays counter spells in person. No one wants to feel that when you actually have to stand outside the person after the match.
All right, very good. So thank you both for being here today. I really appreciate it. Let me give you a chance to kind of throw out some of your social access where people can find out more about you. Of course, we've set you up forums on the BC Book Club. So there's actually a special user forum in the BC Book Club for each of you, for people to ask you questions and check in on the status of your projects. But how else can people follow you? Adam?
I have a Twitter account. I'm actually not great about posting. It's mostly just me retweeting a bunch of stuff from people that I follow. I have my website, and there on my website you can find information about the projects that I've completed, some information about things that I'm actively working on, and of course contact information. If you want to email me directly, I'm always willing to talk to people that way. And if you wanted to get a hold of me on Twitter, I'm certainly available there too. I definitely check it enough. So, you know, feel free to tweet me at any time. I'm at @Marsh. I don't have a Facebook page currently. I had one for a while, and then I just kept getting a bunch of spam comments. It was super annoying. So I ended up decommissioning it. I may build another one at some point, you know, depending on whether or not there's any desire for that. But definitely my personal website, Twitter, you can get a hold of me there. I don't have. Yes, okay, that's a good point. It's amichaelmarsh.com or amichaelmarsh.net. Both of those, using my software engineering skills.
Look at you.
Both of those. That's
DNS.
right. A DNSC record. Yes. So yeah, you get a hold of me there. I'm always willing to talk to people, unless you're just hitting me up with crazy stuff, you know. So as long as you're not sending me ransom notes cut out of, you know, stuff from the newspaper and magazines, we can talk.
I don't know if it's written pretty well. That might be interesting.
That's a good point. I mean, if it's interesting, maybe we'll have something to talk about.
Right? Good craft. There's a lesson.
Good craft. Yes.
Marcus?
Well, you can find me online at marcusscampbell.com. That's where I have some of my previously published poetry, linked to a lot of the other stuff that I'll talk about here. It's all kind of compiled on that one space. On Facebook at Marcus Campbell, that's where I'll be. On Instagram, that's probably where I'm the most active, is going to be over on Instagram. I think I have an embarrassing number of Instagram accounts, but I'll get into that in a second. So my personal Instagram account is Marcus_S_Campbell, just like the website, just with some underscores in it. I do a Magic page where I open a pack of MTG cards daily from the newest standard set, kind of talk about those, engage with the community. I love the game, so I do that every morning over at a pack a day MTG on Instagram. And once every few days, I'll do a free write from a writing prompt, and I'll post that over at Poetry Periodical on Instagram. But again, all of those things, all those projects can be found in one spot at marcusscampbell.com or Marcus Campbell on Facebook.
Look at you. All right. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank both Adam Marsh and Marcus Campbell for joining us today. If you have follow-up questions, because I noticed we did not have anything in the tweet or in the chat. So last call for chat questions out there, fantastic attendee, while I read this closeout. I'd like to thank I'd like to thank Adam Marsh and Marcus Campbell for joining us today. If you have follow-up questions, maybe you've watched this online and you wanted to ask them a question, certainly feel free to send us an email to podcast@brickcavemedia.com or go to bcbookclub.com. You can get a membership either for free or if you'd like to contribute. There are a couple of levels for that, and then you can make a comment on their forum pages. This broadcast will be archived and made available both in our podcast and on YouTube in the channel for Brick Cave Media. If there are any other topics that you would like us to cover in a future event, please feel free to email us at the email address I have mentioned previously. This was an exclusive webinar for the BC Book Club, Brick Cave Media's community portal for readers that love Brick Cave books and their authors. You can join today and be a part of the Brick Cave story at bcbookclub.com. Gentlemen, any last words before I turn off the recorder?
Thank you for having me. Stay safe and be well.
Likewise. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Oh, look at that. Thank you guys very much. Be safe, and we will talk to you soon. And